Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today, this afternoon, for the fourth in our webinar series, Africa Green Building webinar series, Establishing Good Governance. I'm your moderator for today. My name is Trudy, Muwanga, an advocate and co-founder and director of Green Building Council Uganda. Our speakers for today are established leaders in the field of green building, and we're delighted that they're able to join us and share their experience and insights on this pivotal and very important subject. The lead presenter and speaker is Mohammad Asfour, Regional Head and Middle East and North Africa and African Networks at World Green Building Council. Hi, Mohammad. Also with us is Ted Otieno, who's the Vice Chair of Kenya Green Building Council, or it's Kenya Green Building Society, sorry. Hi, Ted. And finally, the last panelist would be Lisa Reynolds, CEO of Green Building Council South Africa. We're delighted to have you all, and thank you very much for joining us. Going forward. It's with, right, basically, yeah. We're delighted to have you all this afternoon, and we'd like to take this moment to basically get to know our audience and know who you are, whether you're an aspiring organization, whether you are already starting but looking to get information to get better, and exactly where you are in the cycle of development. So basically, there is a poll which we would invite you to participate in, and which results of which will be fed back by our technical moderator. So if you please help us and there's a poll. If you take the poll, we'll get that information back for you. So the questions really are, as you can see them, is why are you here? You would select one of the options offered. Are you interested in starting your own organization? Are you a staff member at an existing organization? A board member at an existing organization? None of the above, just interested in learning. We'll take a minute and get to give you a moment to respond. As I mentioned before, there's a technical moderator who will be collating the results of the poll and will pop it and give us those, that information.
So 72% of the people with us today have voted. 14% of them are interested in starting their own organization. 38% are staff member at an existing organization, while 33% are board members at an existing organization, and 18% are none of the above and are just interested in learning more about the topic.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. At least it gives us an idea of the spread of attendance and what your areas of interest are. So basically, starting an organization, for those who are looking to start an organization, starts with a dream. And whilst you might have yours, I'd like to throw the question out to our panelists and say, what was your dream when you started? And what is it that you were looking to do, and how do you go about it? If I can just send that question to Mohammad.
Okay. Now, I've started many organizations in the past, or several green organizations in the past. And the main reason was always to do something positive to the environment. As a child, I was always a bird watcher. I used to go out to the wilderness, and I was specifically more important initially about biodiversity. But then again, when I started seeing the impacts of climate change on the environment, I also gotten interested in other topics, just such as green buildings and so on.
Interesting, that's wonderful. So it's a very rounded and interesting approach. What about you, Ted?
So for me, Kenya Green Building was actually formed in 2013. I joined Kenya Green Building in 2018, and the reason why I joined Kenya Green Building and why it was started is because we believe, just like the right to life in Article 3, we also have the right to live in a green and sustainable environment. Now, as you know, Africa is definitely going to have the hardest effect when it comes to climate change. And as Mohammad has said, climate change is a big, and it's real for us here. So, you know, for us, it's very key that we form this organization. For us is to help build a sustainable environment for us in the future. So that's the reason why Kenya Green Building exists, is to push for green buildings for all.
No, it very definitely is an issue for us. Obviously, climate change is an issue for everybody, but we are going to feel the impacts much more, and we're already living with the experiences. So it makes sense that you would want to come on board with something that actually looks to address that problem. Lisa, may I throw the question to you?
Thanks, Trudy. Yeah, I think the same as and Ted is that we want to make a difference. We want to prevent climate change. Poor indoor air quality. Poor air quality causes so many health problems and things like that. So I think just overall on the health side, it's also so important. But in South Africa, we started, so Green Building Council started in 2007, and we had South Africa had just done the energy efficiency standards, and it was a huge shock to the system. But on discussion, we found that more and more people wanted to go green. People are like-minded, but they don't know how. And I think they also needed a home and a space where we could guide them into green. And it's more than just energy. It's about water. It's about waste. It's about everything. And I think it's really showing. People say they want to do their piece and their bit for the environment. How do they do it? And we felt that the Green Building Council was the place to say, let's show you, this is how you can do it. Let's guide you, and let's be that voice.
And I'd like to take a moment actually at this point and recognize the fact that we have all learned a lot from your experiences, not yourself individually, but also from Green Building Council South Africa, because we have referenced a lot of what we are doing, and whether it's Kenya and Rwanda and in Uganda, to actually learn from what you've gone through and try and adapt it to our own context and specific circumstances. So thank you very much for sharing. Now getting back to the subject of establishing good governance. Basically, we have an expert in the house, and to break it down, Mohammad will take us through the key elements.
Thank you, Trudy. Now, it's easy to dream, but it's very difficult to implement. Therefore, starting a non-for-profit organization means that you will need to have the right amount of commitment. You need to be passionate about the cause, dedicate enough time to serve your cause, And of course, very importantly, have a clear mission and vision. Developing your mission and vision is extremely important because it is what differentiates you from other organizations in the market. And what we see today is that there are many green organizations that are serving different objectives. You need to be specific in order to ensure success in the future. When I was part of setting a Green Building Council in the past, and even before we came to discussing our objectives, we felt it was very important for us to highlight what were our values and guiding principles, because this culture that we were to create would be the thing that would sustain the organization in the future. So developing values and guidelines, guiding principles is extremely important. Of course, any organization that is to establish activity needs to have a legal registration. It has to be always within the rule of law, and it should, of course, develop its own strategy that would be its path to achieving the mission that it set for itself, or the founders would have set for themselves. This strategy will be eventually translated into annual plans that cover different areas, such as marketing your green organization, your membership system, and how will you be recruiting members in the future. Annual audits are always required to ensure that your books are in the right order. And lobbying, of course, and capability in lobbying is one of the very important areas that green associations need to do very well, especially green building councils, because advocacy is a very important part in promoting the green building movement within your country. Now, green building councils, green associations need to survive. And without having the right business model in place, that will be very difficult. You cannot only depend on grants or aid that you are receiving, but you could also think of other ways through which you could sustain your green organization. Some green building councils have their own rating tools, some depend on membership, some see grants, some have a combination of all. But at the end of the day, you need to see what works in your country and build on that. Now, good governance is a very important pillar that needs to be thought about right from the beginning, and this will be the topic of our webinar today. So what is governance? Governance is the system by which an organization is directed and controlled. Why do we need good governance? Now, there are few reasons that are extremely important. So having the right governance structure in place helps you take the right decisions. Usually it's a consultative process, and a governance system will show you how to go about the decision-making process. It provides smoother processes. It enhances organizational performance and ensures transparency. Further, it enables preventative and corrective actions in case something went wrong, and of course creates a culture of excellence. Now, there are several principles for good governance that are adopted globally, and I'll touch upon a few. So accountability is a very important component of a good governance system. A good governance system should be transparent, as we said, responsive, effective and efficient, and follows the rule of law. It should guarantee the participation of the different stakeholders. So in an association, you usually have 3 levels of stakeholders. One is your members, and when your member base grows, it becomes very difficult for them to be part of the day-to-day decision-making process. Therefore, they go and elect a board of directors who appoints the staff, and ensures that the staff performs up to the desired level. Now, within an organization, there are different roles. So within these three different categories, we have members responsible for electing the board, monitoring the performance of the board. They have the right to join the committees that are constructed by the board, and of course, approve the organizational bylaw. The board has also many responsibilities, including shaping the strategic direction in consultation with all the stakeholders. The board is responsible for raising funds in many cases, lobbying with the government, and working closely with the government in the case of a Green Building Council. It appoints the staff. Together with the staff, it represents the Green Building Council or the Green Association with external parties, monitors and evaluates performance, and supports the CEO. And this is a very important point I'd like to always cover. In some boards, I've seen that the relationship with the CEO has been tense to a certain degree. I think the board needs to work closely with the CEO to ensure that the CEO is able to perform to the best possible level, and that needs a lot of support. The board approves the annual plan and budget and forms committees within which both staff and board members and normal members could join. So what's the role of the staff? The staff are responsible for managing day-to-day operations, implementing projects, representing the organization, and developing the annual plan that is approved by the board.
So basically, what you've run through here, the board especially is the directing heart and mind of an organization, and has a crucial role to play. What sort of person do you...
Yes, yes, I will be touching upon that, but if you allow me, I'll just try and give you an idea of where GBC's members come from. So if you can see the slide in front of you, the GBC membership covers the full value chain of organizations and individuals involved in green buildings. But in general, 21% of our 70 global Green Building Council members come from the building product manufacturing and distribution sector. 22% are individuals, 27% are professional services, while the remaining amount is scattered between different sectors. Now, coming to your question, or maybe before answering your question, maybe we could ask the panelists what they think of who should be sitting on their boards.
I think it is an important question, and they are the directing heart and mind of an organization. So
I think we're facing some technical issues here. This poll was supposed to come up later.
Later, yeah.
Yes, but it's come up now. So maybe Trudy, you could ask the audience.
Okay. We're back on the slide that we should be on, and on the issue that we should be touching on. So basically, if we could go ahead, Lisa, I'll throw it to you. What sort of person makes an ideal board member, and why?
Okay, I think again, as Mohammad outlined, there's a number of categories that we get our membership from. So the board should somewhat represent the membership, but ideally the people that sit on the board must also be as committed. They must be like-minded, and they must also see the bigger picture, the whole what the Green Building Council is trying to achieve. I think they must, they sort of, you don't want to have somebody on the board that you still have to persuade to have this mindset. They must already be there. And I think it's very important that they are influencers within the sort of building sector or even the precinct sectors, is we need to find people, and it's not necessarily the ones with the biggest building portfolio, whatever, even though they do help, obviously, having building portfolio people on the board, but it's people who make a difference, people who put the effort in and make a difference. I think it's who can help you influence the market, who can assist you to build the green message, and who's committed.
That's a good summation. Ted, do you have any other points you'd like to raise on that issue?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Lisa has said. Again, the board should be made up of a diverse team of ambassadors in the sustainable built environment, and also give some good examples. Is that you're able to, for us in Kenya Green Building Society, we have honorary board members. So we have people in ambassadorial or policy positions that can influence, government, can lobby. As Mohammad said, part of what we do as Green Building is to lobby. So getting some of those as honorary board members is also good for your organization, because then it gives you more leverage. You're able to get into doors, knock on doors that previously weren't reachable. So that's what I would add is there's a possibility of having honorary board members, but then at the same time, there's also this legal aspect. So I think it's very important for us that we have somebody who represents us legally as Kenya Green Building Society for trademarks, incorporation, and things like that, so that we abide by the law.
Thank you very much for that. I think one
Excellent.
little point I'd like to make at this juncture is the idea of a champion board is a bit of a cultural shift, because we used to have board members as prestige, something that you sit in, you get to at the end of your career. And that actually does make a very big difference in terms of the dynamism of an organization and what they can or can't do out in the practical realities. So back to you, Mohammad.
Thank you, Trudy. So the important point here is that there's no one size that fits all. Each organization, each GBC, develops its governance system based on its local characteristics, culture, and environmental factors. But in general, any board composition should ensure board diversity, expertise, and the availability of required skills throughout the selection process. Representatives from different membership levels and sectors should sit on the board because they need to have a voice. And in some GBCs, we find that there's corporate membership, individual membership, different levels of membership. So each group should have someone sitting on the board. The board should always attract and involve new members in order to widen the pool of potential board members, without forgetting the very important role that previous board members would play. So it's always very useful to have people on board who can tell you the story of what happened before this board was in control. Now, back to you, Trudy.
Thank you very much, Mohammad, for that insight. On the issue of selection of board members, obviously every organization has its own process. I'd like to throw it out to the panelists on maybe Ted first this time. What is the process that you use for selecting board members?
So for us as Kenya Green Building Society, we use a nomination and election for board members, and this happens during the annual general meeting by the members of the association. And so our process is an election and nomination process.
Thanks. Lisa, do you want to have a quick word on that?
Yeah, I mean, very similar is members nominate boards, they potential board members, they sign the nomination. And then the current board looks at also the skills that we need. What skill set do we need in the board? Because boards change over time and the needs of the Green Building Council changes over time. And that's one thing about, I didn't mention about the board members, is that it also must reflect where you're going, what your growth strategy is, and because the board does bring a lot of networking, a lot of, as I said before, influence, and I like the word that Ted used, I can't remember it now, but it was in that. So, and the other thing I was going to say about the board members being selected is, again, this sort of process is also part of the good governance, and I think Mohammad will go into it, but it must be seen to be free, open to all people. You know, there must be that opportunity for people to stand and understand the whole election process, and the voting must be, you know, we have audited voting and things like that. So it's part of our good governance.
Thank you very much, and I'll give the matter back to the expert on the subject, Mohammad.
Thank you, Trudy. So there are different points that need to be taken into account when you select your board. Now, there are different selection processes. One is through election, as we heard. One is through appointment. One is through a mix between both. So, for example, you'll elect 9 board members. Then those 9 board members will select another 2 because those 2 are important to the organization, but usually would not be willing to run in the elections because they were maybe very senior government officials in the past, and now they want to contribute to civil society, etc. So it could be either by election or through a combination from both. Now, in order to ensure good governance, the General Assembly needs to always approve the nomination process. Board responsibilities need to be clarified in advance, because what happens in some cases is that people nominate themselves, they get elected, and then they do not realize how much time and effort they need to put into this. So it's really very important to know that in advance. And for the General Assembly or the member base to make the right decision, they should have enough information about all board candidates so that they take the right decision. And as we said before, the new board should always have members from the previous board. Back to you, Trudy.
Right. As the helm of the organization, would you recall, I'll throw this out to all of you, but starting with Lisa this time, do you recall a situation where your board demonstrated leadership you want to share with us?
Yeah, well, I think I count myself very, very lucky is that in the current board, I've got a lot of commitment from them, and they get involved in the activities with the committees, which we'll talk about later. So I think they're hands-on, and I think that's, you know, it's very, I'm lucky there. But true leadership is, our chair, when we went into the whole COVID and the lockdown situation, is she's head of she worked for a sort of big property portfolio, and she basically committed a whole lot of certification, a whole lot of buildings for certification, just to ensure, you know, it was in the plan, but she said, okay, let me put it up front to ensure that we had this sort of roll of certifications coming through for this year, which obviously has been quite tough for everybody. You know, so I think that's true leadership, when you say, I'm going to commit, you know, and put forward this portfolio of buildings to do the certification. And I think, you know, I often tease the board, and I do the whole ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, and they always step up to the plate. And I think it's great leadership that they show.
That's a very fortunate situation, a very good one, actually. People should take note. Ted, can we take a moment with you?
Yeah, sure. So again, as Lisa said, even for us at Kenya Green Building, because it's all of volunteer board, so already there's leadership, involved by everyone has volunteered to, their time, which is their biggest resource. But then for a situation, I remember in following the election in Kenya, as you know, it was almost like the period we're facing now. We really had a hard time as the organization because our members weren't paying their dues. And we had to actually downsize our secretariat to only one member. And the board really stepped up to fill in the gap because, we had to run everything, late night meetings. The Africa Green Building Summit, there's a lot of board members who actually chipped in their own money just to see that through. So I think in general, that was a moment where our board really demonstrated leadership.
Thank you for that. Back to you, Mohammad.
Thank you, Trudy. Now, leadership is extremely important, especially in times such as the times we are passing through now. Many GBCs around the world are facing many challenges because of the current situation. And in such a situation, I think what we need is what Jim Collins calls level 5 leadership, which is a type of leadership that builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. It's extremely important to maintain that level of humility, but also ensure that there is discipline in place, because without having the right amount of discipline in an organization, it would be very difficult for it to overcome such challenges. Now, as we mentioned before, one of the most important roles of a board is to set the strategic direction of an organization. And in such times as the times we are passing through now, it needs to also take initiative. And without having enough creativity, enough empowerment, enough support, that would be extremely difficult. A board should set the example and make productive contributions. We heard from Ted when he spoke about how the Kenya Green Building Society's board dealt with the current situation. So they got involved and made productive contributions. It is very important when you're working within green organizations to encourage teamwork, because you can never do it alone. And when you encourage teamwork, you should reward achievement at the same time. A board, of course, resets the course towards goals and facilitates resource provision and encourages commitment towards vision and stimulates high performance standards. In many cases, distractions occur, and a board with leadership would always ensure that the vision and mission are always kept in mind, and that the organization is guided through whatever situation is in order to achieve the desired outcome in the future. An effective board builds a sustainable and independent institution by connecting the past to the future. And this is an extremely important point. So what happens when the old board is gone? Long live the new board. So we need to really think of succession from the beginning. And to do that, we need to build institutional capacity at the level that if people move on, the institution continues. That same institution will maintain the mission and vision we spoke about, despite the change in people and leadership. A successful board builds on previous work. I've seen boards that have done totally the opposite and that caused the organization many challenges. It is also very important for the previous board to pass on the knowledge, experience, and legacy to the next board, and that would happen, of course, through having the right systems and documentation in place, and by telling stories and by maintaining the presence of previous board members in existing boards. A written succession plan needs to be in place as well.
Great, thank you so much for that. I think we'll take a moment and ask our attendees what they think is the best board duration. So how long should the time be? There's a small poll we'd like you to take. If you could please help us with your answers. So what's the best board term duration? Is it 1 year? We've got the results back. So they've got 11% for 1 year, 2 years is 26%, 3 years is 42%, and 4 years is 21%. So basically, the highest vote goes for 3 years as an average figure for the board term duration.
Any insights on this? Maybe Ted and Lisa could share their experience. What do you think of the results?
I think they're quite interesting because I must tell you, on our board, the chairperson serves for a year, but a board member can stay on the board for 9 years if they want. We don't often have such a long tenure, but we sort of think it's a bit historical. From the time that we started, there was obviously a lot of founder members and founder board members that gave a lot and continued the work. So ours was quite long, so it's 9 years. And we always talk about the succession planning and that, and the continuity of the strategy is we will have a chair, a vice chair, but also the past chair will also be on the board still. So you have that sort of continuity of the strategy and of where you're going. So I find that 3 years is very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. As for us, it's actually in our constitution. It's a 3-year term for the board. But again, as Lisa said, our immediate past chairperson sits on the next board, so that way there's continuity. But again, so it's interesting, the numbers, but for sure there should be some change, because then it brings in new insights to the organization and then makes new partners and networks. But definitely we have to build on the past networks, otherwise, as Mohammad has said, you keep digging deeper in the hole and yet you're trying to climb out.
Yes, and I think what's important is this openness and ability to discuss what suits your situation better. In my case, when I was chairing a board or a GBC board, the term was 2 years, and I could only chair for 2 terms. So this ensured that there was always succession and there was always new leadership.
Great, thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Trudy. So in terms of board term duration, what I think we all agree on is that it needs to be limited, because as we discussed, it ensures integrity and development, encourages fresh ideas, establishes a new framework, and fosters the emergence of new green leaders and ambassadors. And because GBCs are non-for-profits, there's a limit as well for the time that people would be willing to give. So it's always important to have the next level of leadership ready to take charge and lead the organization. Now, another issue I thought would be useful to discuss here is board meetings, because you elect the board and what happens next. So it's very important that they schedule the annual meetings much in advance and link those meetings to certain deliverables. For example, if they meet in October, then they will be discussing the budget of the next year. If they're meeting in June, then they are evaluating the performance for the CEO during the first half. If they're meeting in the beginning of the year, then it would be to evaluate the performance of the GBC during the previous year. So you schedule those board meetings and you ensure that they are linked to a set of deliverables and actions that you need to achieve. Now, to keep track of the mission and to avoid distractions, it is suggested sometimes to have the mission vision in a one-page summary, and in addition to a one-page summary of the strategic plan, be on the board meeting table on each board meeting. This way, we will always remember what is it that we are here for and how we are planning to achieve those objectives. A clear agenda needs to be sent in advance, and standardized documentation needs to be in place. So with every board meeting, you send the agenda in advance. Usually it's the secretary of the board who sends that agenda, and it's the secretary who approves and takes minutes, and that are shared with the board for approval later, or at the end of the meeting or during the next meeting. The topic of governance sometimes is a bit technical, so please bear with us, because these are important things but might not be that interesting in general. Now, for the success of an organization, it's extremely important to maintain a healthy relationship between the board and staff. And part of good governance is defining the responsibilities of all involved parties. We've seen organizations in the past have conflict around who's responsible for what. Is it the CEO? Is it the chairman? Is it a staff member? Is it a board member? Who exactly is responsible for what? To avoid this conflict, it's very important to have an authority matrix that summarizes different roles and distributes summarizes roles, distribution, and relations between the board and staff, and also the General Assembly or the members. It also guarantees a clear reporting and communication system to ensure a healthy relationship between board and staff. It's very important to have clear and written procedures to ensure smooth workflow. Back to you, Trudy.
So basically, clearly a board once convened or once brought together can't do everything. How do you go about distributing or assigning the different assignments that need to be covered, and what type of committees would be required and effective in a green building or organization or in a green association? What sort of committees are needed to get the work done? Because they can't all do the same thing at the same time. So I think there's a need to assign things to different people, and division of labor and all that.
So maybe
yes.
Yeah, shall I jump in here? No problem.
Jump in.
Thank you. Yeah, as you say, we said the board sort of does the strategy, and then the committees then have to do the action plans that match the strategy. So in the Green Building Council of South Africa, we have quite a few committees. We've actually got a committee for good governance. So we've got a governance committee. We've got a technical and a marketing committee, and we've got a public sector committee. And then, as and when if there's a project that needs to be done, we might set up an ad hoc committee. What we try and do is we have a board member who will chair that committee, who's got that passion for that line of that piece of the strategy. And it's I think we said it earlier, it's a mix of the staff headed up by chaired by the board member, and then made up of other members as well that are not necessarily on the board, but who have that right skill set to assist in rolling out the action plans. So the committees are vital to keep everything moving.
All right, thank you very much for that. Ted, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I do. So, so as a Kenya Green Building Society, as what I think Mohammad shared in the last slide is very interesting to have, you know, the vision and mission at every meeting. I think that's something that we'll take and adopt. I think that's very important. But our mission is to advocate, to certify, and to train. So that is what advises us in the Kenya Green Building Society as far as committees. We have 6 committees. We have the education, technical, finance, advocacy and marketing, and then we have an executive committee, which is made up of the board members, the secretary, the treasurer, the chairperson, and the vice chairperson, and that kind of executes what needs to be run in the organization, and also includes the CEO who runs the organization. However, we also do give our premium members a committee position in any committee they choose, just for transparency, because we'd like our members to also be part of the committee so that they can influence the decision. So our premium members who are now financial and real estate also make up our committees.
Ted, so it goes back to you, Mohammad.
Thank you. So from what we heard, committees complement the board, and they also sow the seeds of new leadership and new board members in the future. Now, what's very important in managing productive committees is to open committee membership with a criteria to filter and approve applicants. So you open it for all your members, and then you put checks and balances in place to ensure that the right applicants are on the right committee. Committee members should sign a non-disclosure agreement, a letter of commitment, and an interest declaration letter, in a best case scenario that is, and these same documents need to be signed by the board when it's elected. We should, as Lisa mentioned, you could also have some task forces, or what we call ad hoc committees, that could be formed for specialized matters, technical issues, research, etc. The effort and achievements of active committee members should be acknowledged and appreciated, because a lot of these members, or all of these members, are doing this for free and is taking from their personal time or from their professional time. So a simple incentive scheme could be identified, such as sending them a thank you letter, exempting them from their membership fee, anything that will show that your contribution to this GBC or to this green organization is appreciated would be wonderful. As with the board, committee meetings should have agendas and minutes, and should be available to ensure efficiency and alignment with goals and strategic direction, and to be shared with new members. Of course, we mentioned the authority matrix, and the authority matrix would also identify the roles and responsibilities of committees. You were going to say something, Trudy.
Now, I was going to say, basically, on the question of committees and assigning tasks to smaller bodies within the organization, the question really has to do with startups and small organizations. How do you think, how would you advise them to to manage that aspect of workflow management in terms of, you know, how, if you've got a small organization, you may have 2 or 3 people, how do they go about it?
Is this question to me or to all the panelists?
Sorry, it's to you.
Okay. I do not think that having a small number of board members would be sufficient. And I think part of the leading role that the founders would play is to gather support around the cause and recruit people to be part of that momentum. So I remember when we set up a GBC, we started with 5 people. Gradually, the founders grew to 13, but at the same time, we had about 100 volunteers dedicating time either on a daily basis, weekly basis, or on a monthly basis. So part of leadership is to ensure that you have enough support. And as we heard from Ted, in critical situations, you need these people to get involved.
Right. Sorry, just to as a point of correction, it wasn't that you have an organization of 3 people. I'm saying you might have a core of 3 or 5 people, or a small number. So in that case, are you talking about really very much having to pull together to steer the ship, and then, you know, until you can get the critical mass of people on board? Or do you just delineate and say, we'll deal with certain issues and then, you know, open it out when you get a bigger number?
Yes, no, I think there's a critical mass of people that need to be involved. And when you develop your strategy, it would include milestones. And one of these milestones would be maybe to increase the number of your members and board members and people who are involved, so that you ensure that there are enough people to follow up on different tasks.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much.
And
So,
Trudy, can I add something here? I think also, you know, we talk about the committees that we set up, but I think once you've sort of set the strategy, that also dictates your committees. So, for instance, when you first start up, perhaps you want to deal with the technical issues first. Then you know, obviously set up a technical strategy, you know, so a technical committee. So again, you look at from where you start. I mean, you can't do everything all at once. And I think you prioritize now, what's most important, and that's where you put the emphasis. And then you look for the people within your environment that have that skill set as well. So, you know, so when we sort of started writing the rating tools, then obviously there's a big push on technical, and it was really asking around for volunteers, saying, you know, whether it be architects, standards writers, engineers, whoever, and you find the volunteers come, they do appear, and you just have to say, well, this is what we're going to do first, and then build up from there. I think the very important thing is to prioritize, especially if you're small.
okay, excellent. Right, thank you very much for that. And on the issue of a code, developing a code and code of ethics, could I maybe throw that topic back to Mohammad?
Yes. So when we use the word green, I think it fits well with the word ethical. For that, we need to develop our own code of ethics, or what is also called the code of conduct, which is a formal document that establishes behavioral expectations for the association and the people who serve within it. Now, what would code of ethics include? It would include a statement of compliance, the values that are very important to you as an organization, and the procedures and policies for conflict of interest, whistleblowing, gifts and hospitality, confidentiality, fraud and bribery, prevention, detection, and response policy, plus issues that have to do with the work environment. Now, these topics are a bit technical and I won't delve deeper into all of this, but I would like to focus on the issue of conflict of interest, because this is something I've faced a lot during the past 11 years in which I've been dealing with GBCs. So a conflict of interest may exist when an individual has a vested interest in the subject at hand, which may influence decision-making by considering his or her vested interest over that of the organization. This is a situation we need to avoid. It may be actual, potential, or perceived, and each circumstance should be considered and addressed accordingly. A clear policy to deal with conflict of interest should be available at hand, and it's important to declare interest regularly within the board or the committees to avoid any conflict. Now, having this right code of ethics, and this links to the value system that we mentioned in the beginning of this webinar. The right code of ethics guarantees to a great extent a healthy work environment. What do you mean by that? Now, in your code of ethics, you establish safety and trust through addressing a few important issues such as bullying in the workplace, harassment in the workplace, smoking, drugs and alcohol, discrimination. In order to ensure that you have a green association that is in harmony with your values, it is useful to include all of these issues in your code of ethics. Would anybody like to comment on this before I go into speaking a little bit more about the WorldGBC membership system? If not,
we'll take a moment and see.
Yes.
We'll take a moment and see if anyone has anything to say. I don't see.
Trudy, just on that side, I think also it's very important, and the piece on conflict of interest that Mohammad touched on, and I think also, you know, it's quite prestigious to be on the board of a green building council, and that's why I said you needed committed and like-minded people, because again, it can't be people with sort of there's always a line of vested interest, but it can't be the overarching and overwhelming thing that comes through. So I think it needs to be dealt with quite clearly and quite that, you know, and people on the board will, you know, have to do some work, and there's always work involved within the Green Building Council, but it must be stated up front, it must be clear, it must be transparent, so that you can manage that sort of perception of conflict of interest. It's very, very important.
Very good.
I agree. I agree with that, and as Mohammad started his presentation, you know, what we're doing is ethical. It's for humanity. So I think it has to be, you know, green buildings and sustainability in the built environment is something that we're championing from the point of a basic human right. And so even within our systems, we have to have ethical, transparent and clear guidelines, because as much as we said we want a diverse board, we want to be held accountable by transparent and clear rules. So I think it's very important for any organization, and not just a green building council, but more importantly, if it is a green building council.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. I think maybe we'll come back to you, Mohammad, to look at what the WorldGBC membership system looks like.
Okay, so look at the WorldGBC as an association of associations, let's say. So, or as an association of green building councils. And within our membership system, we have 4 different levels with different requirements. There are 3 levels, and there's the pre-prospective. It's not really a membership level, but it's an entry point. So you start as a pre-prospective or as a prospective member. When you become a prospective member, you become part of that General Assembly that we spoke about of the WorldGBC that includes about 70 green building councils. As the organization matures, it achieves emerging status, then when it's proven its track record for a period of time, it could receive its established status. Now, in each level, there are different requirements, starting from legal registration to your membership base, to your governance, to so many other things that ensure that you are a healthy organization. Therefore, whenever somebody is considered a WorldGBC member, it means that they've gone through a process of what I could call quality control. It's like a checklist, ensuring that you adhere to a certain set of requirements. Now we have about 70 green building councils around the world. I'm very happy that our Africa network is expanding, and I hope that after this webinar, we will also have more applications and more people will be aware of what is expected from them in order to establish a green building council. Now, what do green building councils do in general? They collaborate. About 123,000 people participated in GBC events annually. This could be Kenya GBC, GBC South Africa, and others. They innovate, they communicate. We are now getting close to the World Green Building Week, where most of our GBCs take part, including our African GBCs. Some GBCs have their own rating tools. So about 2.9 billion square meters of buildings have been certified sustainable by 36 GBC rating tools. About 50,000 people are trained and educated by GBCs, and advocacy is another very important area that green building councils focus on. So that's it from my side. Maybe, Trudy, we could now open the floor for questions and answers.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation and for all the insights provided. I want to say that I'm looking at the questions provided. There's a question actually that's already been posted, and that refers back to the issue of conflict of interest. So I'll throw that out to all of you. Actually, maybe we can have a comment on it. And it says, can you give examples of conflict of interest? I mean, you have detailed it quite comprehensively, but maybe we can have a further comment on that point. That is a question that's been posted.
Who would like to take that question?
Lisa, please.
I'll take it. Examples of conflicts of interest. So you find it in sort of, say if one of your board members is from the sort of service provider or materials truck provider side, and you put out a request for quotation for some work, and then that board member will apply for it. And again, you want them to be able to do business, but it must be transparent, and you must see that it's free. Just because somebody's on a board, it doesn't mean that they will get, you know, that sort of request for quotation. So we find it's more if there's some kind of service provider on the board, is that you always have to be very careful if there's something that needs to be done and they do quote for it. So we try and be careful with that. And the other strange things that sometimes it happens, and I know it's not conflict of interest, is that if one service provider is on the board and another one isn't, then you have to have shown that the path there is quite clear and transparent, and that there was no favoritism. I think it's really, you know, not stopping people doing business, but making sure that the process is very, very rigorous. It has to be rigorous. And so the only real example I can think of where there's a a conflict of interest. Or if maybe, I suppose, if a board member is in the property sector and they try and bring undue influence on getting their building certified, for instance, that then it's a conflict of interest. I think the presence on the board assists in that process, and it doesn't. It has to, again, go through a rigorous process that must be followed to the letter.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. On following up on that question, actually, and I'll give this to Ted. In the event of a conflict, how should the board react? Should the board member involved recuse themselves, or what is the path, best path to take in that situation?
Yeah, so I think as Mohammad mentioned in the section where he said who makes up your committee, the reason why you want to have this committee is so that you have a transparent and clear, way of holding each other accountable. And so I think no member of the board, even the chairperson, should be immune to accountability. But I think that the committee, the executive committee, can form a task force to look into the conflict of interest, look at it based on the documents. I think that's why it's very important as you're starting up the organization that this documentation is put in place so that it's objective, even as the person is as the issue is raised, that there's a task force that can be set up to look into the matter. So I think that's what I would recommend. If there's a conflict of interest, that a separate task force based on the current board members and the executive committees can come up and look into it.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. I think we can.
Yes, if you allow me, also in some cases you would have your ethics committee that would deal with any conflict of interest situation, and this would have members who are respected by all and who would be known for their ethics and values. So that also helps in some situations. And if you allow me, I'd like to comment on the situation. I remember when I chaired the GBC in the past, a government organization came to us and said, there's this huge building we're building. We'd like you to provide us with some assistance as to what we should ask for in terms of how could we green this building. So we tried to organize a task force of people who would go and help that organization in telling them what is it that's required. And remember, maybe 10 years ago or 8 years ago, there wasn't as much clarity about green buildings as there is today. So one of the board members came up to me and said, sorry, I cannot join this because I'm already interested in this project. So what we did is we prevented him from receiving any information about this project and from joining the committee. So the important point here is, yes, you will have all the documents and codes of ethics and conduct in place, but it should come also from within. People who should take the initiative and say, yes, I have this conflict of interest, so please keep me out of this.
That's actually very true. Thank you very much for that. We seem to have struck a motherlode with the conflict of interest situation here, because there's another question, and if I may, just put it out. And the question is, well, basically, still a question of conflict of interest. How does the council deal with stakeholders who are also partners of the staff and who are willing to sponsor or fund the council? Now, how should they deal with it? Because it sounds like it's a theoretical question, but how would one maneuver that situation in the event that it was an actual practical reality in your case? I'll throw it out to Ted to start.
Okay, Trudy, I think you're breaking up, but I think your question was how does the council deal with stakeholders who are willing to fund the council? Is that correct?
Yes, it was who are willing to fund the question. The crucial issue is that the person who is the stakeholder is also a partner of the member of staff, of a member of staff, and so they're willing to fund the council. You have the issue of conflict of interest and gifts and hospital, all of that intersecting in that question, I think. So the person who posted it clearly wants an answer that would allow them to unravel that situation.
Okay, so number one, as Mohammed mentioned during his slides, is that the ethics has to outline gifts, and so it's the proper documentation that outlines what is a gift and how is it given. I'd give you an example of the Africa Green Building Summit, where as I mentioned, we were not able to get sponsors for the event, and 2 of our board members had to actually give their own money in order to for the summit to happen. And this was a huge sum at the moment. But again, as I mentioned, that was a show of leadership. It was very clear that whatever they were giving, the council did not, have to give them anything in return. And so it's what is clearly outlined. But then as the council, what we did is we have them as honorary, life members. So it's our way of appreciating this gift, that was given to keep the association or goals, because that was a big goal for us, that we had to have the Africa Green Building Summit. And so, what we did in return is not, give them a cut or give them a percentage or tell them, you will have this many projects because they're also green building consultants, but rather than that is show an appreciation to the movement by saying, okay, we'll give you honorary board member, life member position or things like this. So it's just, I guess the basic thing is for it to be outlined clearly what a gift is, how it's given, and that there is no kickbacks from it.
Thank you very much, Ted. I think that pretty much brings us to the end of our questions. Yes, there are no more questions received. So, if I may have a quick round robin and see if there's any questions or issues that anyone wants to finesse before we round up and leave, starting with Lisa. Any last comments?
No, I just want to say thank you, Richard. Just to add to what Ted said about if somebody gives us sponsorship for something, the only thing you'll get in return is a thank you. There's no quid pro quo in it, but we obviously encourage it, and it is a slippery slope. But again, and I think Mohammad also summed it up where he said green equals ethics. I mean, that's a huge message, to say, guys, this is what we stand for. There's nothing more to this. I think the big thing now is also understanding where we are in these times of hardships, where our members are, how to, they have to cut the suit according to their cloth, and how can we help them with that. I think it's an important consideration because it is a two-way street. But again, we do it with sort of clarity, with transparency. But I think it's very, very important that everybody knows who you are, what you stand for, and then people don't ask these questions. And I think, even when we're talking about conflict of interest, first prize is that person recognizes a conflict of interest and recuses themselves, that there's no difficulty in this whole thing. It must just be very clear. So yeah, and I think it's what I would encourage the smaller green building councils to do when they're starting up is, I know this, Mohammad keeps on saying this is like a very technical, there's a lot to do, but if you set these rules up front, it makes your life easier going forward. The good foundation, good governance foundation means a good green building council. And I think if the effort that you put into this good governance side, it just makes your life much easier going forward, because nobody doesn't understand the rules. Nobody misunderstands who you are. So I think it's a vital part. It's a cornerstone of what we do. And I'd like to say thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time and for your participation. Thank you, Mohammad. Thank you, Ted. Basically, thank you to all our attendees. Just to really sum up very quickly, good governance is at the heart of any successful enterprise, whether it's for profit or non-profit, and especially for the green associations or green building companies or organizations looking to set up. It's the backbone, cornerstone, as Lisa has said, and essential for any organization looking to achieve its objectives, to drive improvement, as well as maintain a legal and ethical standing in the eye